part of the charm of this movie and sort of the ideology of this series is that the stuff you think we're supposed to care about, we're not going to care about. We're not going to do a movie about the differences between 2008 and 2025. Hi, welcome to the Film Element Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gallant, and I'm here in my beautiful Film Element office, I guess. Today I'm going to be reviewing another film. It's called Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie. Now, if you are not aware of what Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie is it's basically a Canadian indie film based off of a TV show that was produced and made by Matt Johnson and Jay McCarroll. Now, if you're not aware of who these two are, especially Matt Johnson is a Canadian director, an indie director, who sort of made his bones, I would say, over the last decade and a half, making these sort of Jackass era-esque shows and TV shows and films that don't use any permits, don't get releases, at least in the traditional sense, and basically really test a film's E&O insurance and pushes distribution's, let's say, level of their threshold of what they can stand in terms of, can we show this to an audience and get away with it? Can we do it without being sued? So this film is absolutely no different. Matt Johnson specifically became famous and sort of an indie film legend many years ago when he did this film called The Dirties, which was another film that he shot, and it was completely permitless, had no traditional producers or legal people sort of overseeing what they could and couldn't do. And on top of it, they were using unlicensed music, but the film was so popular and big that it got into really big festivals. And then legend has it, he sat down with Kevin Smith, the famous filmmaker producer, and Kevin Smith wrote him a check for apparently tens of thousands of dollars to clear the music rights so that they could go out and distribute this film. And from that point on, Matt Johnson's career has sort of been on an upswing since then. I know him mostly from a show called Nirvana, the band, the show, which was this really irreverent, silly comedy that was set in Toronto, and it had a pretty ridiculous premise. You didn't really even know what it was every episode, but essentially they would film it like it was a traditional single camera sitcom, but they would shoot real people in real situations and sort of mess with them. Like I said earlier, sort of that Jackass mentality and aesthetic from the early 2000s. Well, I guess it's still going. They're about to make a Jackass 5. So I guess it's still going out there. But certainly when I was growing up, Jackass and other teams like CKY, they were so widely known. I think when skateboard videos were so big back then, I don't really know what it is. I'm a 40-year-old man. I don't know what the skateboarders are sort of watching and consuming now. But certainly, and I wasn't a skateboarder. I just hung out with a bunch of them. But early in the 2000s, we would all get together and watch those DVDs and VHSs of skateboarders doing prank on unsuspecting people. And then obviously even, the Just for Laugh gags and all those other secret camera shows were certainly a big fad about 10, 20, 30 years ago. This film, Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, carries on that tradition in ways that we haven't seen in a very long time. And it's very entertaining. I thought Nirvana, the band, the show, which existed many years ago and ran for, I believe, a couple of seasons, they did some really outlandish stuff, and I don't remember all the episodes because it's been a very long time, but I'll go into this more throughout my review, but there was one episode specifically where I guess they were really invited to Sundance because I believe that's where The Dirties premiered. So Matt Johnson is sort of a Sundance alumni. And in the episode, Kevin Smith is in there as well. And again, I don't know how much he was given and what he knew about when he did that episode, or if he was let in on the joke at all, or if he wasn't. And they pull some very hilarious pranks trying to get into parties and messing up a few screenings. So I remember that episode being mind blowing. That they had the balls to go to Sundance and do something like that, and it was quite obvious that Sundance was going on while they were doing that. So they were there to have the balls to do that, but also risk potentially being banned from Sundance because of what you're doing, or B, just being seen by people that are there and you acting like this, and then potentially blacklisting yourself from working with any other producers or filmmakers or actors or whoever that are watching you sort of humiliate yourself. But that seems to be Matt Johnson's brand, is that he is, not unlike another Canadian filmmaker, Tom Green. They seem to have this shamelessness about them that in a lot of ways is very admirable, because you watch what they do and you go, I could never do that. I'm as extroverted as I might think I am. I would never have the balls to go up and humiliate myself in front of complete strangers, or humiliate them, or just not care what they're thinking or doing while I'm trying to do what I'm doing on camera in front of a group of people. To me, that stuff is outside of my comfort zone 100%. And maybe if it wasn't, I would be in a different place in my life right now. But I'm very comfortable with where I am anyway. So in that sense, I always give Matt Johnson a lot of credit. He seems to just be completely bullheaded in whatever he does. And the people that are around him, especially Jay McCarroll, seems to be in the same sort of boat as well. As this movie proves, I feel like the two of them, I assume probably in real life, one of them sort of settled down, and then the other one is still who they are. And I think Matt Johnson is still very much who he is. And it feels like Jay has settled down in life, and you could feel it throughout his performance a little bit. Not that he was holding back necessarily, but you could just feel that he wasn't as comfortable making a fool of himself as he might have used to been during when they were doing Nirvana the band, the show. So to get into it, Nirvana the band, the show, the movie is a time travel movie, strangely enough, about two friends who are, I guess, a sketch group of sorts, and they're trying to perform at this venue called the Rivoli, which is pretty famous in downtown Toronto, but also not that famous, which kind of is part of the joke, I guess. It's not the Apollo or, Carnegie Hall. It's just this, cool little spot in downtown Toronto where artists and performers go, either music or stand-up. I would even argue the Horseshoe almost has more of a bigger legacy than the Rivoli. But again, that's, I assume, part of the charm of what the show is. It's so low-key in sort of its aspirations and scope that it actually makes it funnier. Now, I didn't grow up, but I lived in downtown Toronto for about 15 years. And the Rivoli and Queen Street, Queen and Spadina, all those neighborhoods I was very familiar with. The Bloor West Village, the Bloor and Spadina, all those neighborhoods that Nirvana the band, the show, was very much about sort of exploiting and showing off. Anyone who lived in those neighborhoods around that can really appreciate the nuances of that show and what they show off. I'm always surprised at how far that show had expanded and how many people appreciated it. But I think it's because it's so funny that it lends itself to broader humor. Sometimes when you make something so specific, that actually makes it more universal. I remember hearing that from somebody. I don't know exactly who. But I think that's true. The more succinct the little details are of the places that you're showing off and talking about can actually appeal to more people in a strange way. And I think that's what was Nirvana the band, the show's greatest strength is how much they sort of reveled in their low key uh, locations and what they sort of addressed around them and what was happening in their own neighborhoods and how much they cared about those neighborhoods. And on top of it, they had a real hipster mentality, and being a hipster was a big thing, 15, 20 years ago. I don't think it's as much these days. I'm sure it's transformed into something else, but that's also a snapshot of that time. And again, someone who lived there during that time, it cuts right to the core of me because I remember being out in public and seeing people like that, especially, improv shows and stand-up shows and all these different places where people are performing. It's like quite often they look like hipsters. They looked exactly like Matt Johnson and Jay McCarroll. So I think in that sense, that was the appeal of the show, especially to me. And of course, I followed Matt Johnson's career since the show ended, and he's always been a great advocate for filmmaking, especially in Canada. And I think he's an important voice because, like I said, I feel like he's one of the most bold filmmakers that's out there right now, Canada and U.S. Included, because he's just doing such weird, off-the-wall, unsuspecting things that you can't help but appreciate it. Now, I'll go into my review. All of that said, does that make Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie good? In my opinion, how I felt watching it, I thought it was a little half-baked. And the reason I felt that way is that I think the concept is so funny and such a great idea. They're literally ripping off Back to the Future. And, one of the charms of the show and the movie itself is that they have a VHS tube television where Matt's character constantly watches VHSs, especially old school ones. I remember there's a scene from the show where he's watching Jurassic Park and he recreates the first time Dr. Alan Watts sees the Brontosaurus, and it's really funny. I think it's like the first scene of the show. And then in this one, I think he was watching another movie, but at some point he put on Back to the Future. So they're literally filming his television playing Back to the Future. Again, I don't know what sort of rights and clearances they were able to get, but good on them for being able to do this and put it in a movie theater. And then that convinces him to turn this old RV that they have in their driveway into a time machine, very similar to how it was done in Back to the Future. And it works because these characters are so relatable, and the stakes are so low, and that the budget is low. So the fact that they are attempting this is really funny. I will say the opening scene I thought was spectacular. There's this stunt that they start off. Okay, no, there's two opening scenes. There's an opening scene that takes place in 2008, and it's obvious that the footage is real, and it's Matt Johnson and Jay McCarroll in the same apartment that we see them in modern times in 2008. I don't know who's filming it. Probably a similar, the same filmmaker. Oh yeah, no, it is because they reference him later on. So the same camera person is shooting them in 2008. They're obviously very young, very much younger, skinnier, all that stuff, and they're doing what they end up doing in 2026 in 2008. It's the same sort of charm and nonsense that we see for the rest of the film. So that opens as sort of this nostalgic, like, just so you know, this is how long we've been doing this for, 18 years, which is fantastic. That was a great way to start the film. And then the big opening stunt, the hook, I assume, is that they go, and then this has been in a lot of the marketing and the trailers, is that they go on the CN Tower skywalk, where you go up to the CN Tower and you go outside while harnessed in, right? Obviously, they have to harness you in because they don't want you to jump off the side. But essentially, you're outside of the CN Tower, however many stories up high that is. And that's a very famous attraction that's been in Toronto for about 10 years, maybe longer. And they do this stunt that is so well executed firstly, they're going through security with like a pair of pliers to cut the rope. And as far as we understand, they're talking to real security guys. Now, it made me wonder what would have happened if this didn't work. I don't exactly, you don't know how movies are made. They could have filmed it after they did the stunt, or it's like, or maybe they really did get kicked out because they go up and we see some GoPro footage of the instructor of the Skywalk group that they're a part of, and then we see some security cam footage of the group up there, and then we see the two characters up there, and they're part of the guide. They're moving along on the outside of the CN Tower on the little tram outside, and then all of a sudden Matt Johnson pulls out some pliers, or not pliers, clippers, I should say, and snips his wire and Jay's wire. So now they are not tethered in, and they're free to go. So what happens here is pretty astonishing. I can't imagine it's real. Like, it would be impossible. But I would say the fact that I'm not 1000% sure shows how good the visual effects are, because then the two of them jump off the tramway, jump off the CN Tower, which again, if I think about it, where you are on the skywalk, I think that tram is up high. So if you were to jump off that little walkway where they do the skywalk, I don't think you could jump far enough to hit air. I think you would jump and then you would hit the roof of the major part of the CN Tower, the first part. Because there's two parts to the CN Tower. There's the main part where most people go to that has the glass floor, the rotating restaurant, and other just little, I think the gift shop and all that stuff up there. And then the next part is the observation deck, which I think for a while was the tallest man-made observation deck on Earth. So anyway, where the skywalk happens, I think, is above that first part. So if you jumped off, you would probably hit the roof of the restaurant or something before you would slide down and then fall off. So obviously, that alone is a reason why you can't just jump off, and then what ends up happening is they pull parachutes and float down, and the whole story is that they were going to jump off the CN Tower, parachute into the middle of the Sky Dome during a Blue Jays game, and basically advertise that their band, the Nirvana The Show, is playing at the Rivoli. And obviously that concept is hilarious. They execute it extremely well. They make it seem like one of their cameramen went into a Jays game, got a seat, and used their phone and shot the sky waiting for them to come down. And then the big joke is the roof of the CN Tower, the Sky Dome closes. So it screws up their plans as they're floating down, because then they can't even get inside. And then they shoot this footage. Again, really well executed from a visual effects point of view. But it literally looked like the two of them are standing on top of the Sky Dome arguing with their parachutes sort of sitting there. And that clip alone was so hilarious and so well done. Again, you watch it, you go, that's not real. But he also does crazy shit. So how could it be real? I don't know. But obviously they're going to market it and make us believe that it is. So I give them a lot of credit, especially on that scene. That scene was an extremely good way to start the film and got you right into, the vibe and what to expect. As the film goes along, and then they travel, the big thing is that they travel back to 2008. I forget exactly what the reason is, but I don't think that's super important. But it's very interesting that they do that because, when you shoot a time travel movie, especially in a busy city, you have to account for so many different things because A, the city changes so much over 18 years. And second, it's like, you have to account for cars and people's, what people are wearing and the different buildings and just different things that we have now that we didn't have in 2008. And to do that on a regular Hollywood budget. You know, you have art directors, you have visual effects artists that can paint stuff out and make it all look. But it's funny because 18 years is not that crazy of a jump, so a lot of stuff you can keep in, but it's just funny to think about what you should keep and what you shouldn't. And so they obviously have footage from 2008 that they utilized, and there's one scene in particular where they meet their 2008 selves, but sort of have to move around them. Like they obviously cut something together that they shot in 2025 or 2026, and then sliced that in with the 2008 footage to make it seem seamless, which is just a really funny exercise. So that was, again, stuff like that was fun and enjoyable. But again, it's a bit of a gimmick, and it's sort of SNL-ish, not in a bad sense, but you're like, okay, this is a fun idea, but you still have to go somewhere with it. You know, we're all paying money to sit there in a movie theater and watch somebody's work. Why did Neon want to put this film in movie theaters? And again, I saw it on a Tuesday at like noon, and there were people in there. Quite often when I have to do that, because it's a lot harder for me to see movies, I usually have to see them during the day now, quite often by myself if I really want to see it. Quite often when I'm in those situations, there's not a lot of people in there. And I assumed for a film this small that it was probably just going to be me or like one other person in the theater. But, you know, there's a decent handful number of people, which surprised me. But it also gives me hope. Apparently the film did pretty well, especially considering its budget, made, you know, a couple of $1 million, which is at the box office, which is really great, you know, considering how small the scope and scale is. But anyway, going back to the film itself, so there's that gimmick, which is enjoyable, but again, was it something that we needed to go to a movie theater to see? That's debatable. And I think I'm in the minority. I think this film has been received, at least critically, pretty well, and I think a lot of audiences really enjoy it, which is great. So again, I might be a contrarian. And again, I'm not going to say I like this film, but especially as a fan of the TV show, there's a moment in this film that was my biggest laugh, is they go to a movie theater during the movie in 2008, especially because they don't even know that they're in 2008 yet. And they sit down and they watch The Hangover. And again, it's like, I don't know how they get these licenses and how they pull this off, but they play a pretty decent chunk of The Hangover during the movie. Matt Johnson and Jay McCarroll's characters are sitting in a movie theater watching it, and they show it. And then what made me laugh was there's a scene where Bradley Cooper pulls up and says to Ed Helms, "Hey, Dr. F-word. Dr. F-word," and Matt Johnson's sitting there, and the whole audience starts laughing, like really hard. And then the wife says to Ed Helms, like, "All right, get ready to go, Dr. F-word." And then the audience keeps laughing, and Matt Johnson looks around confused. And it's a great little moment, basically saying, like, are we in a different time of comedy where it's okay to laugh at this? And I'm not going to get into any debate of whether or not that's okay to laugh at. But I'm just saying it was a very interesting moment. And it sort of goes to the heart of sort of my issues with this film. I laughed really hard at that moment, but I also wish they had kind of gone further with that stuff in terms of like explaining how different life is in 2008 versus 2026. Well, I guess in the movie it's 2025. But at the same time, part of the charm of this movie and sort of the ideology of this series is that the stuff you think we're supposed to care about, we're not going to care about. We're not going to do a movie about the differences between 2008 and 2025. We're going to subvert all of that. All the stuff you think would be kind of cool to do in this weird little time travel movie, we're going to take a left turn and focus on the fact that Jay becomes a big star, because he did we touched the wrong blade of grass in 2008, and now everything is different in 2025, right? It's one of those things, because eventually the characters make it back to 2025, things are different, and then they have to figure out how to get everything back to normal. A pretty standard time travel trope, but done with a very lo-fi aesthetic that was very interesting. So overall, I enjoyed the film, but if I'm being honest, I thought they did more interesting stuff, at least in some of the episodes of their show, which came out a while ago. Whereas the film had sort of a bigger scope and bigger ideas, but wasn't able to fully execute and bring them across the finish line, in my opinion. I would have been fine watching this at home on a streamer, but I thought it's a Canadian film. It's sort of a big deal. I kind of want to see what the hype is about. And, I'm so grateful that so many people have went and saw this. By all intents purposes, from what I've read, Neon is happy with how it's done. Movie theaters are happy with how it's done. Again, it had way more matinee screenings than I expected, and especially for something so small. So it shows that there's an appetite out there for something like this, and it actually makes sense because there's a very YouTube prank feeling to the film as well, just done much better. But overall, it does appeal to this new generation, despite the fact that the guys now are considerably older. I don't know how old they are. Maybe they're closer to my age, which is 40. But regardless, I think the fact that they did this and put it out there, and then Neon saw that, realized it was a good opportunity to actually just make some money and have people come out to the movie theater, I think is great. And I'm really excited for the fact that it did so well. However I feel about it, overall, I still think the movie is good. But was it as good as I was hoping? Not me personally, but I think I might be in the minority anyway. But overall, a win for them is a win for all of us as filmmakers, especially as Canadian filmmakers right now. And anything that brings people to the movie theater to watch, is a plus in my book. So again, I would give probably about 3 out of 5 stars, which is, definitely not a disaster. But was it as good as I was hoping? Unfortunately, not really. But I appreciate what they're doing, and like I said, I think Matt Johnson specifically is a great voice in the filmmaking landscape. I wish he had had sort of bigger aspirations or to do something bigger than this after, the success of Blackberry, which came out a few years ago, which he was heavily involved in as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're the ones reaping the rewards of what they put together. So I think that's a huge accomplishment. So that's all I got, and thanks for watching.